everyone. Welcome to the Chicago Justice Podcast. My guest for today is Steve Rhodes from the Beachwood Reporter. And this is going to be recurring pieces that we do, basically a media criticism addition to our podcast. We're going to look at media reporting around crime, violence, and justice issues in Chicago, decipher them, let you know when the media is being played, let you know when for some reason the CPD decides they want all the news about them all out on the same day, and the media wants to report like it's all an exclusive interview, even though there's like 5, 6, 7 hits across the Chicago media in the same day. So we're going to start with coverage of the Chicago Police Department on May 15th. That was a Friday, and for some reason the Chicago Police Department decided they wanted to make news on a Friday. And they did across 6, 7 media outlets all on the same day and all reported as if they were exclusives. All right, so Steve, welcome to the podcast. We really appreciate you joining us for this voyage on our media criticism about justice issues here. So let's start out quickly, just without going too in depth of the pieces. What was your best piece of the 6 or 7 that hit on May 15th?
Well, my best piece is, this is all relative because I thought it was still not good, but I guess it would be the WBEZ reset interview that Jen White did. And it's not because it wasn't bad. It's just that the one thing she did was bring up the crime rates in Dallas when David Brown was the police chief there that didn't really align with the claims he was making. Now, bear in mind that I don't really believe there's any connection between the crime rates in Dallas and David Brown's police chiefing. I think that kind of causal relationship is fraught. But it was really the only piece that seemed to, at least in a small way, challenge him, but it was still pretty crappy.
I agree 100%. My best piece is also the reset interview on BEZ. And overall, and we did a Facebook Live interview about the coverage of David Brown before he was confirmed. And I will say that throughout this short period of time, the only outlet that has been consistent with looking at any real data related to what his time was in Dallas has been BEZ. So it's not a shock that they would be the best out of this pack.
And that makes sense because they she cited their own analysis.
Right, an analysis. That's fascinating. Chicago media doing an analysis.
Word, yeah.
Yes, it is. Okay, what was your worst piece?
I'd have to say the Sun-Times piece because it was filled with stenography, unvetted claims, cheerleading. Although, the TV stations were pretty bad too. I think maybe I don't know if this is being unfair, but, I hold the newspapers to a higher standard, and that really is unfair. We expect so little out of TV news that it's like, yeah, whatever. So.
Well, I will tell you my worst piece.
So you're going to pick a TV station, right?
I am going to pick a TV station.
Yes. Okay. You're probably right.
Maybe not. I mean, I'm open for disagreement. Let's debate things. My worst piece is the piece by Megan Hickey on CBS 2 Chicago. And I will say that it's not just Megan's work in it, it's how CBS set it up. Because she's from the investigatives team. And this was the investigatives team making the superintendent answer the questions.
Right.
I found that kind of fraudulent in that, as we'll talk about in a couple minutes, this seemed like a planned hit from the media department and the CPD. So I found that to be bad. Also, Megan has some doozy quotes. I'll read it. The former Dallas police chief brought violent crime to historic lows before he retired in 2016.
That's the note that I made too on that piece.
And, one, I would think that if you're going to do this, if you're going to do this piece, you would at least look at what others had done. And while a lot of it has been cheerleading, a lot of her, you know, other news from the Tribune and other television outlets, and to me, the Sun-Times has been the same way. BEZ has done enough analysis, basic as it is, to prove that that is just not what's going on. That's not what happened. So that is my piece. In future episodes of this, we'll get on, we'll have other categories. I'm going to just do two quick here, which is the best use of data.
Wait,
obviously.
Can I just make one comment real quick on that CBS 2 piece? Yes, in fact, what WBEZ found was that it was nonviolent crimes that dropped to some level, you know, significantly under David Brown's tenure. So it's kind of the opposite, and it also says before he retired, but once he retired, the violent crime rates had gone back up. And then the next part that she said in there, he said that through community policing, he will do the same here in Chicago. That's just talk about cheerleading. Like, okay, he said that. So,
right, and we have to report it. So, right, and so when you get to analyzing the data, and this goes into the manipulation that's been ongoing, that was ongoing in Dallas for years. He was obviously, we've talked about it before, he was definitely involved in it. He was involved in it supervising when he was deputy chief, supervising the lieutenant who directly manipulated data in one of the scandals. And then there were at least one of two more scandals relating data manipulation. So you get the violent versus non-violent. In his violent crime scandal, he recategorized, or well, deputy chief, his lieutenant did, recategorized how they categorize attempted assaults, attempted batteries, aggravated assaults, aggravated batteries. And that turned violent crimes into non-violent crimes, or misdemeanors. I should say felonies to misdemeanors. And misdemeanors sometimes just didn't even get recorded. So when, you know, if you look at one of the things Brown has been pushing, well, don't look at the homicide numbers or the murder numbers. Look at just the violent crime numbers. Well, yeah, if you look just at the violent crime and not counting shootings, you see, hey, wait a minute, the numbers did drop. But it turns out the Dallas News has reported on that. It was a scandal. There was a big scandal on it. You can go look at our Facebook Live interview if you want to go in depth on it. But that's why he does this. He's very skilled at talking around the question and trying to steer the discussion. And if you look at nonviolent, yes, nonviolent did drop. But once again, he got caught in scandals manipulating data around, of all things, car burglaries. And they had to re-examine 2,000 of those during his tenure. So those are big problems when news reporters and any reporters, let alone like CBS and a television, you just let his statements skate.
Yeah. It's really, I mean, it's what can we, it's hard to believe that the media could do so poorly, but you know, we've been watching them do it this way for a really long time. And yeah, you'd think, and it's interesting that he wants to that David Brown divert away from looking at the murder rate, because that's one thing that, as we've talked about in the past, you can't really fake, like, because dead bodies are dead bodies. So that's like when you want to look at, if you're going to look at crime rates of any sort, that's the one place you can go to have some degree of certainty. And, you know, the reason, so I suspect that's why he wants to deflect attention that way.
Right, and I want to give Jen White some credit on BEZ. She did push back in her interview with the superintendent. She definitely pushed back and was able to document, which BEZ, Patrick Smith of BEZ, has done, which was, and for our viewers, the homicides. First of all, let me say that when Brown inherited the department and went from deputy chief to chief, all over the country, there had been 20 plus years of violent crime drops, right? So in the BEV piece, when Jen White's like, yes, you got murder 1 year of your tenure, went down to violent crime levels, to really historic levels, but then it popped right back up. So if you look at your first year and your last year and you're looking for a downward trend, there was no such trend.
Right.
Right? There isn't any.
She said it was flat.
Right. And he went to in spin mode. He's very good at it. He went into a spin mode where he says, well, if you look at my tenure for the number of homicides, I kept them under 200 every year, which no superintendent had previously done. And I had the least number of homicides of any superintendent's tenure. Well, yeah, because your years were 2010 to 11 to 2016.
Right. Like
right?
so
You inherited the
chief in America during that time.
Exactly. So that doesn't show us anything about you. But what this has shown is that I think what these series of interviews have shown, and the little back that BEZ pushed, is that he's a spin master. He really reminds me, he's far more talented than Eddie Johnson is at spinning. And he honestly reminds me, I think he's going to go on the top. I'm sure he's going to find himself a place on the top list of superintendent spinners. Him and McCarthy may go one, they may tie for the top spot.
I think McCarthy was and is a more sophisticated person, and I think his spin was maybe more sophisticated, but you're right, because what David Brown then, said, well, but you're going from my first year to my last year. But if you look at some of those individual years in between, sorry, everybody, the murder rate, went down. It's like, so, that a trend from start to finish is what you look at.
Yes. And he does not want to look at that. He has, I think, for the most part, been able to skate on. He had this thing he told his troops without actually, saying it publicly, and then that leaked into a story. I probably linked on purpose. We're going to get homicides to 300.
Yeah.
I think the city I think it would be pretty remarkable if you could keep homicides for whatever your tenure is, 4 years, 5 years, if you can keep them under 500 consistent.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know what in your background thinks you're going to hit 300 and you can possibly hit it.
Yeah. Well, he made this claim, and this is one of the things that he said in one of the interviews. I think it was the Sun-Times, that I felt a follow-up question was missed. Was he said, I have this belief system, and my belief system says that you have to believe it before you can make it happen. That's how he was explaining how he thinks he can hit that mark. And what I want to know is, well, what belief system is that? Is that a religious thing? Because in his book, it's clear he's a very religious man. Or is that like the secret thing? Like you can manifest success? Like what is that? What is that even about? Because it kind of seems like he's kind of a crazy person, frankly.
Yeah, he's definitely very confident in what he's going to do. And I'm not sure if that confidence is based on reality.
Right.
To be completely honest with you. All right. Jeremy Gorner wrote a piece in the Tribune. And I got to tell you, for the life of me, couldn't exactly figure out what the superintendent was talking about. Was it
Me too.
right? Well, he was talking about he's getting away from specialized units. Okay, but he's going to get away from specialized units, but I'm going to create this specialized unit
right.
that is going to help bring down violence. But it's not all enforcement. It is also going to be somewhat community policing based.
Yes. He said he was going to create a roving unit, which would be the specialized units that come and go with every police chief. They go one way, then they go the other. But he described it as a significant community policing-oriented unit that would drive all over the city, which drive all over the city like doing good deeds, basically. Well, that's like the cynical version of community policing. You know, that's not, if it's community policing, you're in one neighborhood and you're establishing relationships and being part of the neighborhood. The cynical version of community policing is that this is just a PR effort. We're trying to make you think we're officer friendly. But there's definitely a contradiction there. It just didn't make any sense.
Well, you know, we're going to have a guest on the podcast and our Facebook Live series in a couple weeks. I think on June 17th, Barry Friedman from NYU Law wrote a great book on policing without consent. He's written a great recent law school article, law journal article about disentangling what the police do. But in his book, he talks about how there's no consistent definition of community policing. Mm-hmm. And if you look wide enough around the country, departments have actually started and funded SWAT teams under the definition of community policing.
Right.
So, well, yeah, I mean, in tradition. Right, exactly.
Community policing in your application.
Right.
And you can get howitzers.
Exactly, and exactly. And I thought the piece by Gorner was poorly reported because it didn't make any sense. I wasn't 100% clear what his idea was, right? And
I agree.
You know, this is a flyer by the superintendent to see reaction, because he didn't say he was going to do it. He didn't say he had a firm plan. This was just an idea off the cuff. And to me, I thought, well, you should push back and flesh out ideas. Is he going to do it or isn't he? And what specifically is it going to do? And I've talked to a policing expert, and the one that I reached out to about this very article said, well, it's not the worst idea trying to have like a roving unit that comes into a community that's suffering and both do some enforcement and also try to do some things that leave a lasting benefit to the community. I don't know if I agree with it. I think that the big failure here in the media is that what both Mayor Lightfoot and Brown are talking about community policing and how much they favor and how much they like it. I would have to assume Lightfoot's talking about the Chicago version. What does she like about it? What was successful? Does anyone think that was successful? What exactly is that? And what does Brown think is successful? Because if he didn't bring homicides down in Dallas, and to bring other violent crime down, he had to manipulate crime statistics. Then how was community policing successful in Dallas? I don't understand.
Right. No, I mean, it's just I think it originally was a real thing with a real concept, but it very quickly just became a buzzword that, as you said, it means a lot of different things to different people. And, you know, as far as I think the way it was originally envisioned, I don't think we've ever truly had it in Chicago. You and I have discussed this a lot in the past, and you've kind of got you know more intimately about how this has and hasn't worked in Chicago. Mm-hmm. But it's the thing that, you know, every incoming police chief says. Every incoming police chief says two things: community policing, and we're going to build more trust in the neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. They've been saying we're going to build more trust for 50 years. But, you know, like, and why does the media let them get away with? It's like, look, police chiefs have been saying that forever. Like, what are you going to do that's different? What? Community police? I mean, we've been hearing that. You know, give me three things that you're going to do different that's going to build trust in neighborhoods. We've been hearing that for decades. Right.
And there's, you know, if you're paying attention to Twitter at all, I think it's been pretty funny lately. The superintendent, they had a string of Chicago police cars with their sirens on driving around the city last night. If you see, if you pay attention to Twitter in Chicago, there was a video of them driving on Roosevelt and I think turning on Michigan Avenue. And then we tweeted out yesterday, supposedly, I've got sources that say it's legitimate, about them doing that various thing in certain intersections and in certain parts of the city.
Where they're blinking the red light.
No, their lights are on and their sirens are on.
Oh, okay.
Oh, and no, yeah, and I'm sorry, that was also, yes, the blinking the red
There
light.
are certain intersections where they've set the red light to blinking, and uh, and the police advised, I guess, each other. You tweeted this out. There's good chance there'll be an increase in accidents because of this, and so that's one of the things that Brown also said in one of these pieces. I could look at my notes and find out which one if we get to it, but he said that he likes police to be seen. He doesn't think that the police are seen and that they're not visible enough. And all I can say is, damn, in the neighborhoods, with the biggest problems, they're seeing way too much of the police, aren't they? Like, you can't tell me the police aren't visible in these neighborhoods. That's insane.
Yeah, and I think I tweeted this out, but I may not. Maybe it was just a friends and text. I'm in D.C. now, and D.C. had the same issue 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I used to come here regularly for CJP, maybe 10, 11 years ago. I would come here and you would see these white strobe lights on the cars, and they'd be flashing all the time. Or every time they were driving, the light would just flash. And I asked people, and they said, well, it's because people in communities don't think they're seeing the police enough, and the police said they're there. So they put these strobe lights on the cars so people would recognize that they were there.
Yikes.
And I don't think you're going to see the South or West Sides. Many citizens are complaining about not seeing the cops. That is not a violence reduction strategy.
No, and especially when they're under such heavy surveillance. I mean, all the blue light cameras and all the other kinds of cameras and so on in those areas. It's, I looked it up. That was in WGN's report on Friday. We don't see the police enough, he said. A guiding principle for Brown is making officers more visible in the communities they serve.
And see, that, ladies and gentlemen, is the difference between having people believe that you're doing better or that you're trying to do things, and then actually doing the things, actually reducing homicides. I don't think Brown's ready for the Chicago media. I don't think he's ready for the relentless push of the Twitter bot, the Twitter trolls that we have here that tweet out the scanner 24 hours a day and pray and exploit violence and crime here. But if he doesn't reduce violence, shootings and gun violence and homicides, I don't think people are going to really fall for these gimmicks. They're not going to care about strobing lights. They're not going to care about flashing lights at intersections. I don't understand what he thought that was going to do. And did he really think, does he think that some young urban resident, let's do the stereotypical male, young, of color, that has a gun, that wants to go engage in violence, is going to stop because he sees the light at an intersection near his home blinking? I don't understand if that's...
I'm afraid of a blinking red light. I mean, this is a big city, and I think you're right. That kind of stuff doesn't fly here. It just...
So I don't know. I think the media in general has let him, and there's going to be a lot more of this, they've let him slide on all these claims about Dallas. For the most part, the EZ's pushing back a little bit. If they would only go look at the Dallas Morning News about his crime manipulation, that would be great. We have a scoop coming out, hopefully in a few weeks, about research we have done on him. I'm just sad. I think that WGN piece was done by Ben Bradley. It was.
Yeah. There was some
I don't know
news
what
in that piece.
Go ahead.
I was just, there was some news in that piece that didn't really get noticed, which is, in my view, this is news, is that Brown essentially came out against beat realignment. He said he's not in favor of shifting officers from relatively safe communities to ones plagued by crime. And his quote was, "Taking from one area to give to another, I don't like that." we may have short-term violence spikes to address but long-term, we don't want to do that. Well, for one thing, they're not short-term violence spikes in these neighborhoods that need help. And
wait, you mean a 50-year problem with violence, or 40 or 30 or 20? It can't be put down by shifting cops for 2 hours at a time?
Right, and I think we probably agree that there's no known relationship that we know of between the number of cops and crime rates, right? But
right.
At the same time, it would make sense to put the police officers in areas that need it more. Now, caveat, some neighborhoods are, you could argue, are over-policed. So it does start to become a tricky, where you put your officers. But the idea that you would, the real reason that people in the city have always kind of been against realigning your beats to where people live, more like it should maybe be based on population and crime and a whole mix of things, and especially if you're going to have community policing, it's about beats. But the real reason for all these years, we all know, is because people in white neighborhoods will throw a fit if you take away 3 of their cops to send to a poor black neighborhood.
I am convinced that topic was a prerequisite for his being offered the job. Beat realignment had to be off the table because it's way too much of a political hot potato, even for our so independently minded, independently driven, will do its best science-backed mayor, right? So we saw where that went, because if she was truly independent, the first thing on our agenda would be beat realignment. And maybe the way to really do this is, let's look at all the areas that are not experiencing high levels of violence. And maybe we realign those beats and we take those resources and we take them out of the police department altogether and put them into economic development, community development in communities that are hard hit by violence.
That's a very interesting idea.
Right. There's all kinds of ways. I know I talked to a watch commander. I had a source, and it was a watch commander in Austin. And he once told me, and then in other districts, and he once told me, he goes, you know what? Basically Monday through Wednesday, Thursday, I have too many cops on average nights, especially in the winter. I have too many. He goes, but Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I could use a lot more. And we could argue about that, but it shows that a simple beat realignment would probably help, but it wouldn't, because of the union contract and the issues we have with being able to schedule people when you actually need them. They can't align resources the way they would really need to, like any other business would.
Maybe they should do like the fire department then, and do like 3 days on, a week, 4 days off, or you know what I'm saying.
Yes. Right. And Ben Bradley should have pushed back on that. Why aren't you doing beat realignment? Is it not needed? What does the science say? There's obvious science to answer, to compare that. And why would he be, what in his history would make him completely against beat realignment?
Yeah, I wonder how the beats were aligned then in Dallas. And that's, again, something a reporter who's actually getting paid to do this, unlike us, should spend some time looking into.
Oh, don't ask them. I think I asked Fran if she could Google the morning on Twitter. I asked Fran something about if she could Google the morning news and put David Brown's name in and see what comes up and read it. And someone criticized me on Twitter for asking real reporters to use Google. And I was like, well, it would sadly be an improvement.
Well, Fran Spielman is the one who wrote upon David Brown's arrival that David Brown got, in her words, generally good marks from the Dallas media, which I don't think is true insofar as the Dallas Morning News, which is the biggest paper there, the only daily. Um, I think they tussled with him quite a bit.
They did, and he tussled with reporters, and he didn't like reporters. One reporter, to show you how he's not going to get along in Chicago, the story goes, and I heard this from sources in Dallas, that he had an interview scheduled with a reporter, and the reporter got to this headquarters, Dallas Police headquarters, and he had actually scheduled the press conference. They had somehow either manipulated, lied, or just incredibly incompetently planned this interview. And that reporter was unhappy. And this reporter had some words to say about him that included some four-letter words or colorful language.
Mm-hmm.
And he took it. That was a massive grievance he had. How dare they? And I've spoken to some people down there, and I was like, how is he going to survive in Chicago?
Yeah.
Right. He recommended that a reporter be fired.
Right.
He's not going to survive here.
Well, I think, he'll survive for a little while like he is now when the media is in their normal soft mode. But once something controversial happens, what tends to happen is that all the media kind of gang up and get repetitive, and there's so many more media outlets here than there are in Dallas. I'm not sure he knows what he'll be in for when everyone goes after him at once on something, even something stupid. I think that's when we'll see what he's made of.
Yeah, I think the first 3 or 4 weekends in a row with summer violence numbers, that's another episode for us coming up, talking about Memorial Day reporting and past Memorial Day reporting. So let's not cover that now, but okay. You rack up a few of that. Obviously, COVID-19 had an impact on the violence early. It has since come back fiercely and come back so that the numbers are in excess of what they were last year. I don't see anything in Brown's history that shows that he's going to be able to slow those numbers. I don't think any flashing lights at any intersections or 7 or 8 squad cars riding around with their lights on are going to prevent them.
Right.
I think a late June, early to mid-July reckoning for Brown is coming.
Yeah. Speaking of COVID, by the way, I'm trying to find it in my notes. I think maybe it was in the WBEZ interview, but in one of the interviews, I thought he also made news that didn't get picked up on, where he was talking about the federal consent decree, and he is in favor of it, and he supposedly in Dallas, while they weren't under a federal consent decree, he claimed in one of these pieces that he went, here it is, he claimed in the, I guess this is in the Sun-Times piece, he said the consent decree is a low standard. And the Sun-Times says that while he was in Dallas, he examined consent decrees in other major American cities and implemented those changes in Dallas without having a court force them to. Now, first I'd like to have that vetted, but maybe that's true. But the news part is that he said, and then now I think this was in the WBEZ piece, he said that because of the coronavirus, the resources put towards that, he's expecting that they'll get like some delays in the milestones they need to meet for the consent decree. And that may be fair to do, or it may not. I don't know. I haven't examined that, but I thought that was news. Like, I thought that could be a story, like, coronavirus may delay consent decree. Police chief will be looking for delays or something like that. It doesn't mean he's necessarily doing something sneaky. I don't know,
Right.
maybe, but
Do you
it
think
could
he?
totally be legit. But I thought that was newsworthy too, and it didn't really get picked up on.
I agree, and I think that they should have reached out to the monitor and her staff and
Yes.
said, "What do you think about that?" And also, I mean, for a follow up, had BEZ or anyone really dug into what was going on in Dallas under his tenure, they would have said, "Well, when you talk about having these consent decree as the bare standard and you always exceeded them, was there some standard that allowed, what standard allowed you to recategorize aggravated assaults and aggravated batteries in a way that let them drop off the numbers that you reported to the FBI? And when the
Yeah,
Dallas
just
Morning News
curious.
went to vent that by the FBI, those definitions, and the Texas Bureau of Public Safety, and Sam Walker, an expert, policing expert that I know from the University of Omaha, they all said you moved further away from the FBI definition so far that your reporting your numbers made no sense.
Right, right.
Hello?
Yeah.
So, that could have easily been included as a follow-up had they known that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the lack of really examining this guy's record in Dallas and then using that, uh, first of all, to vet the claims, and then also to use it in a sense as a measuring stick, or something of that sense, something in that sense. And in fact, you reminded me when you mentioned the union leadership in Dallas. This was in the Sun Times story. It said Brown said he hopes to persuade Catanzara. Is that how you pronounce his name?
I
The
think
new
so.
FOP, the new FOP president, who is first the Sun Times wrote John Catanzara, who's suspended and has a really horrible record, won a runoff election against Union President Kevin Graham, whose administration was highly resistant to the consent decree. First of all, they weren't highly resistant; they were vehemently against. Okay, let's just
Yes,
make that
correct.
clear. But then he writes, this is Sam Charles, right, at the Sun Times?
Yep,
Is that who it was? Yeah.
it was.
Brown said he hopes to persuade Catanzara the same way he won over union leadership in Dallas. I, I could be missing something, but I don't think he won over union leadership in
It did
Dallas.
not.
Um,
If you
in
call them
fact,
if you call ganging up for wanting against you and enforcing your removal
right,
from the office, that by means that's a one over I would like a life of.
right. I actually looked this up and found a clip. I think this was the Dallas Morning News, in fact. In March 2016, all four police associations joined together to call for Brown's ouster as chief. Not only that, but it was the second attempt to oust Brown in about 6 months. Now, it's possible that I'm missing some kind of persuasion he did. I mean, what was 20? Wasn't that the year he did retire?
Yes.
2016.
Yep.
So he didn't. I mean, he was at. To his credit, he was battling with the. They don't have unions there; they have associations, right? Because
Yep.
it's the South. But to his credit, he was battling those police associations all along. Or the police associations thought that he fired too many cops. At least that's the way I gleaned
Mm-hmm.
from the clips. So again, that's just wrong. I mean, this is a guy who's, you're Sun-Times reporter, major metropolitan paper. You're getting paid fairly well. Why can't you do
Right.
your job? I did it in 30 seconds. I mean,
Right. And it's very, his lies are very Trumpian because you can prove that they're
right.
objectively false. It's
Well,
not
that, I
hard,
guess,
like,
yeah.
right. And just I want to clear up a data point for everyone.
Okay.
Homicides in his first year were 148. In his last year, which is 2016, I believe, which I believe he left before the end of the year,
Yeah.
had 172 murders.
Wow.
So that's 26 more than its first year, which is roughly around 15, 18%, somewhere in that range more than its first year.
He was under a lot of pressure, including media coverage, for he had gotten a lot of credit when the crime rates went down. Now we've since learned that those were jukes, but then he got a lot of blame when crime rates went back up and these murders, and when he left, it was called a retirement, but the council was debating his future. They were debating about whether to fire him down there. So I don't know if he retired or if he was pushed out, frankly.
Well, he retired like Rom retired.
Right.
I mean, and just on that last point, just one more point before we wrap up here. This is one of the problems in policing nationwide, and especially from 1990 through 2016, 15, 16, is that through that time, violence dropped in this country 2, 3, 4% every year around the country, pretty much, comparatively all the time, every year, tick, 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 tick. And every police department and every police superintendent and every police union chief took credit for that. And lo and behold, the late, mid 2010s come and numbers don't go so well at places. And they start ticking up in places. Chicago was one of them. And it happened to McCarthy. Oh, wait a minute. You took credit for the drop. Now the increase is your fault. And here's the truth. The reality is they may have had no role in either, or the best year that Brown may have had could have been 2016, because for whatever reason that had nothing to do with policing, it could have been a really violent year.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with policing, and actually had them not really done some great things, we could have had 210 murders in Dallas.
Right.
But because of those great things, they ended up 172. You don't get that kind of depth of analysis especially in the journalism we see on crime reporters, right? You just don't see that. And that's why you get unfairly police chiefs are stuck with, you took the credit and I'll take the blame.
Yeah. Well, and that point is exactly something that Jeremy Gorner did in that Tribune article. Is he kept tying, he did two things. He kept tying the crime rate, crime and or murder rate, like I don't know if it was specifically the murder rate, to the existence of these special units. Like then they got rid of it, and then crime went up, so then they brought it back. That's the reason they gave. He would write, it backfired. So they specifically made a claim there as a reporter.
Yes, he did.
That we don't know that there's a causal relationship. And then he kept talking about Brown's record in Dallas on reducing homicides, which you've just explained isn't really what happened. And, the way we tie these things to police chiefs without looking at the broader trends is just not good journalism. And if I could just add one more thing, you're right that in the 90s, the murder rate was going down everywhere. Or was it in the 90s? Except in Chicago. But no one blamed Daley. I remember writing about this at the time. No one blamed Daley. But then when they started going down, he got all the credit. It was a great.
No, and that's that's exactly correct, and that's a huge problem. And the reality is, you have to do really sophisticated, high level. And I know everyone hates academics, but you got to do academic research. You got to look at all these variables that could possibly play a role. And I have this issue to wrap up is, there's this Lightfoot is been a year in office now, and she's had I'm going to call it the plague, COVID-19 to deal with, and the CTU strike. But basically, I would say in our Justice 13 survey, none of the reforms she promised have been implemented. They tried to do that community board, but it didn't have a whole lot of power. And one of the aspects, I'm trying to get them on the podcast to talk about it, the group that's writing that, CPAC and GAPA, but they have the GAPA version is we will create evaluations of superintendents. I looked in the academic research. I can't find any. Prove me one that's good and sound.
Right.
I'm willing to hear ideas, but I don't know of one.
Yeah.
Evaluating municipal police departments is very tricky and very hard, and has got to take a multitude of factors into play. I don't know how they're going to come up with something that's sound to evaluate the police chief.
Yeah.
And that was the problem, I think, in Oakland, where they fired, that community board fired the last set when they ended up with Eddie Johnson. The last group of candidates had a female, which I can't remember her name. I think it was Ann something. So, Ann, if it was your name, I apologize.
Patrick, I think.
Yeah, I think it's Ann Kirkpatrick. You're right. You know, she picked up in Oakland, and the board fired her because of problems with her. And they were talking about they didn't like the job she was doing, but they didn't have any objective way of evaluating set up.
Right.
So I think that's a problem. And unfortunately, left in that void, we're getting the media focusing on homicide numbers and shooting numbers as the way to evaluate these people. Because what doesn't matter is domestic violence, sexual assault, armed robbery. None of those things matter. We won't look at those. Yeah. It's only shootings and homicides that matter.
Yeah, right.
Right. Okay, Steve Rhodes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone, we're hopefully to be back in about a week with these, and we're going to look at anytime they're being spun, we're going to look at the news coverage. We're going to look at trends, reporting about holiday weekends. That's going to be one of my favorite upcoming episodes. I have some great interns looking into that. We just passed one, and the murder count and the most violent in 5 years. Oh my God. If they only had some context to that, we might be better off. Rhodes, thank you very much. Everyone else will be back next week with the next show.